Let's kind of start back at the beginning of the Whole Food story.
In our very first year at the big Whole Foods Market store, we experienced a 100-year flood, and it wiped our store out. And the only way we recovered was our neighbors, our customers, they didn't want us to die. In some sense, we were always trying to pay back our stakeholders for what they did to us.
Multi-stakeholder focus and benefit is at the root of your conscious capitalism movement. What is your view on that?
One of the things that we discovered, this is the most actionable thing I'll tell you because every organization can do this. It's very simple. The best way to maximize long-term shareholder value is...
John, thanks so much for your time here, for joining me on the Mark to Mind show. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to talk to you kind of about, well, everything. You know, the book you've written about your life, about Whole Foods, but I'm particularly interested in conscious capitalism and, you know, where we're going, right, in the world right now. So there's so many interesting things going on. You know, before we kind of get into like the future stuff and your perspectives on that, help us kind of like get a snapshot for the origin story of John, you know, starting a co-op or whatever it was that, you know, down in Austin, Texas, where Whole Foods got its start. It's like, how did even that come about? And let's kind of start back at the beginning of the Whole Food story in terms of how that even became a reality.
Well, of course, in the book, I talk about a psychedelic experience I had when I was 22 years old, when I experienced LSD trip that I experienced an ego death on. And that radically changed the trajectory of my life as I made a lot of philosophical shifts after that. And within about a year of that experience, I moved into a vegetarian co-op. And it was a housing co-op. So we were living communally, and there were about 18 people in that group, and they were all college students who were, you know, in their very early 20s. And I wasn't a vegetarian when I moved in. I just moved in and I thought I'd meet interesting people there, and I did. I did become a vegetarian. That was when I had my food awakening. I got very interested. I'd never made the connection. I knew exercise, you could make you feel better, but I always thought of food was just like I was like a car, and I would go in to fuel up.
That's pretty common.
Yeah, exactly. Not that I needed to nourish my trillions and trillions of cells. So I had the food awakening, and I got very interested in natural and organic foods, and I started to study it. The more I studied it, the more interested I got. I became the food buyer for the co-op. I learned to cook. I went to work for a small natural food store called Good Foods. And then I went back to the co-op one day, and I pitched my girlfriend, who I met at the co-op, about starting up our own store, and she was excited about it, and so we did. And that first store was not Whole Foods. It was called Safer Way. It was in an old, big Victorian house. Renee and I lived it was a vegetarian store. It was very pure. We lived in the store on the third floor where the office was. And we did that for a couple of years and lost money overall, but I somehow or another persuaded the investors to relocate it, and we merged with another small store and renamed it Whole Foods Market. And that store took off. It was very successful from the first day we opened it.
What did you do different in that, you know, after you merged and started the second phase?
It was still a natural food store, but we changed up our product mix considerably. We started selling meat, seafood, coffee, beer and wine, some sugar, products with sugar in them. We let go of our rigidity in our product mix. It was still a natural food store. We were really focused on organic foods, natural, lots of fruits and vegetables, organic fruits and vegetables. And so we were definitely very, very different than any other supermarket in Austin. But
especially at the time.
Yes.
Right?
But we had a certain appeal to a younger baby boom generation that was part of the counterculture, you might say, really were our initial customers. The hippies were really our original customers.
How did you draw the line or like stand your ground with regard to maintaining that kind of vision for the product, the type of products that you were going to have and not have, right? Because I could see that, imagine like profit margins and, you know, there's probably a lot of things that could have pulled you a little bit more mainstream. So how did you stand your ground as a company?
It's a good question. And it evolved over time as we learned more and knew more. But we were still committed to selling really healthy food to people. And we wanted to differentiate ourselves from competitors. So it was important that we not just sell everything, or we wouldn't be any different than anybody else. So it came down to our basic, we called them quality standards. We had a team that worked on the quality standards and did the deeper dive into what we sold. We try not to sell artificial ingredients, flavorings, colorings, and preservatives. That was a very kind of a stake in the ground. And we ended up listing hundreds of items, artificial ingredients that we would not allow in our food. Over time, we took a stand on, say, meat. Wanted our meat to be naturally raised, no growth hormones, no antibiotics. Then we evolved to have animal welfare standards as well, that we wanted to rate our foods and our meats in terms of how they were raised and how the ranchers treated them, because there's a huge differential between the factory farm animals that are raised and people mostly eat versus higher degrees of animal welfare, which are more expensive to raise, but the animals get to live out their lives as animals. With seafood sustainability was another big issue for us, because increasingly over time, well, we're fishing out the oceans, basically. And so sustainability is a big question. And we got involved in that, and we stopped selling a lot of fish that were considered to be endangered. And we rate all of our fish based on sustainability indices. So those are some of the things we did. There were others.
That's fascinating. And where my mind is going is how challenging that must have been to maintain those standards as you scaled, just from a sourcing standpoint. So what were some of the biggest obstacles in that regard as you started to scale and had, troubles with supply chain stuff?
The biggest problem initially was just our own internal debates. I've kind of taken a personal vow to never, ever again argue about sugar with people, for example. But what ended up happening over time as Whole Foods got larger was the suppliers wanted to be in our stores, and we wouldn't let their products in if they didn't meet our standards. So they changed their products to meet our standards. We didn't have that kind of clout when we were getting going, but over time, a whole industry kind of got built around meeting Whole Foods Market's quality standards.
Hi, Mark Devine here from SealFit. After 2 years of development, I'm super stoked to announce the launch of SealFit supplements and our first product, SealFit Electro Greens. This is the highest quality organic greens you can find, combined with electrolytes into one powerful supplement. Take with 8 ounces of water in the morning or add to your smoothie to get your day kicked off right with the proper nutritional supplementation and hydration support. And you can also use it as a pick-me-up booster during the day or after a workout. It dissolves immediately, and believe it or not, it tastes great. I've had many testimonials already saying it's the best tasting greens that they have ever tried. So hoo-yah, SealFitSupplements.com, or you can find it on Amazon by searching for SealFit Electro Greens. Hoo-yah. Let's do this. Divine out. That is delicious. One of the keys to building an extraordinary business like Whole Foods, obviously, is just the talent pool. So what was your secret to attracting, A players and top talent so that you could, kind of get out of your own way, so to speak?
What I discovered is that the two most important things everybody's looking for in a job, if they can find it, first, they're looking for purpose. They want to feel like their job counts for something, that they're creating some kind of value in the world, that most people in most jobs don't see how they're doing, what they're doing, how it's contributing to other people. Now, I think most jobs, not all jobs, but most jobs do contribute to other people, but businesses don't do a good job of connecting the dots. And Whole Foods was good at that. We made a big deal. We talked about purpose, higher purpose all the time. We had a higher purpose to nourish people on the planet. We had core values. We had these quality standards. We cared about animal welfare. These were all things that made us walking our talk in terms of being truly a purpose-driven business. Purpose attracts people and it holds people. So that's half of the equation. The other half of the equation is people want to be loved. People want to be cared about. They don't want to work in a job where they don't feel like anybody cares about them. And if you give people purpose and love, you're giving them the two things that they crave the most, that are from a psychic, emotional standpoint. I think that's how Whole Foods attracted so many great people, and that's how come we held them for such a long time. It was one of the weirdest things when Amazon bought Whole Foods and they were looking under the hood. And the single thing that most surprised them the most was how long people worked for the company, decade after decade after decade. That wasn't the way it was done at Amazon.
I'm struck, of course, I'm an author, as you are, and, it's difficult to say profound things in a simple way. And I love how you just distilled a profound truth about what attracts and retains people is purpose and love. Well, you distilled it to 2 words. Simple, but not easy. I think the purpose part is probably easier than the love part. So how did you inject love into the culture at Whole Foods?
Well, first, you have to articulate it, that it's an important value, that caring about team member happiness and well-being was one of our core values at Whole Foods. It was pretty much in every one of our stores, and it was something we talked about constantly. So there was an expectation that we would care about the people that work there. But secondly, and probably equally as important, is it's very important that I embody it as a CEO and that I promote and reward leaders that also embody it. You know the cliche, people pay a lot more attention to what you do than what you say. So you can talk about it all you want, but how do you do it? How do you do it? And one of the things that we discovered, this is the most actionable thing I'll tell you because every organization can do this. It's very simple and it makes a huge, profound difference. We'd end all of our meetings with what we called appreciations. Appreciations were always voluntary. No one had to do it. But they were so powerful at Whole Foods that we had to set limits on how long appreciations could go on. Because
awesome.
You don't want to have an hour meeting and an hour of appreciations. So we set limits on how many people you could appreciate. People know the difference between when somebody's sort of flattering them and when they're actually doing an authentic appreciation. And the difference between the two is that an authentic appreciation, you really can't do it if you don't open your heart. People can tell the difference. So it's very difficult to continue to remain judgment of a person that you feel genuinely appreciates you publicly. It's very powerful. So I'd say you have to articulate it as a core value. You have to embody it as a leader, and then appreciations reinforce it on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, fire the assholes.
Absolutely. I was in the SEAL teams. I don't know if you remember that. We got rid of the jerks fast because they didn't make it through training.
I have a couple of Navy SEAL friends. I thought it was kind of like survival of the fittest. I mean, who can endure the most pain?
That's part of it. But everyone who shows up can endure a lot of pain. And so what's happening is the system and the instructors are choosing their next teammates. And they don't want to work with jerks.
So there's sort of an unconscious selection bias against the jerks.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, and jerks don't make good teammates,
no,
right? Because they're self-centered.
Exactly.
Right? So
exactly.
That team, that ability to take your eyes off yourself, put it on the team, and you can build that into a culture. You can call it love or teamwork. It's really the same thing.
The Navy SEALs that I know, they are very caring people, very service-oriented. They truly know the meaning of a servant leader.
I want to ask about Amazon. So what led you to sell Whole Foods? And did you find Amazon or did they find you?
Well, what led us to sell Whole Foods was we had shareholder activists that were trying to take over our business. Jana Partners acquired a minority stake. I met with them and they had this PowerPoint presentation that was not very accurate, but it created a narrative that we were doing a very terrible job for the shareholders. And they didn't want to work with us. They told us that, look, first thing we're going to do is we're going to take over your board. After
you were a public company by then.
Oh, yeah. We'd been public for 25 years.
Okay.
We're going to take over your board. And after we take over the board, we're going to fire the management team. And then we're going to put this business up for sale to the highest bidder. And there's not a darn thing you can do about it. Not a damn thing you can do about it. And so they didn't want to work with us. And so then we began to explore our options. We hired investment bankers to create a defense for us. We hired defense attorneys, and we were prepared to fight. But the question I was asking all along, what's the win-win-win solution for all of our stakeholders? What's going to be the best thing for our customers, the best thing for our team members, best thing for our suppliers, best thing for the investors, and best thing for the communities we're involved in? And so the other options besides Jana just taking over the company would be we could have taken it private. We looked at that, but taking it private would have meant putting literally 12 or 13 billion dollars of debt on our balance sheet that we would have had to service that debt. And you'd be risking the entire company for bankruptcy if the company had a downturn. That's how that going private works. We thought about selling it into friendly hands, like we approached Warren Buffett, for example. He kind of sloughed it off and said, hey, I own Dairy Queen. I don't think Whole Foods really fits into my brand. He's always had a great sense of humor.
Yes, he did.
And we met with Albertsons on an informal basis to see if they might be a good partner for us. And I came away thinking, this is exactly what we don't want to have happen. We don't want a conventional supermarket to take over Whole Foods. That'll be bad for most of our stakeholders. So I had met Jeff Bezos about a year before in a conference called the Microsoft CEO Summit. I met him. He and I were actually the two people on a panel together. And we got together and talked informally about common interests. Well, he's into science fiction and fantasy books, and I am too. And he's also a scuba diver, and so am I. So we had those are the common areas. And so I liked him. And Jeff's one of the great entrepreneurs of this era. He's a brilliant man, and I happen to be a big fan of Amazon. They've always put the customers first. They're very customer centric. Now, I didn't think about that initially. That was kind of like, I kept asking the question, what's the win-win-win solution? What's the win-win-win solution? Good for all the stakeholders. One day I woke up in the morning and it just flashed in my mind like that. What about Amazon? And we contacted them. I flew down with 3 of my team members and my leaders. We met with Jeff and 3 of his leaders. We had a 3-hour conversation. 2 days later, they came to Austin and started doing due diligence. And 6 weeks after that first meeting, we signed a merger agreement. So it was kind of a whirlwind romance.
Were they already in food? Did they have their Amazon Fresh at the time? I think
Yes, they did.
Delivering.
And this was a time when Amazon was getting more interested in brick and mortar stores. They wanted to take Amazon Fresh into brick and mortar, and we're already planning on doing that. They did some physical bookstores. They opened that up for a while. They did 4-star stores. They had their Amazon Go stores, just walk out technology. So they were dipping their toe, you might say, in the water about physical stores. And so our timing on that was really good because we had intellectual capital that could help Amazon. And so that's the main reason I think they wanted to do the deal.
From your perspective now, how has Amazon done with Whole Foods? Good, bad, and the ugly.
Well, I mean, first of all, it was a win-win-win solution for Whole Foods. Think about it. It was good for our customers. Amazon let us drop our prices 4 times. We needed to get past the whole paycheck narrative. And in the first 2 years, we dropped our prices 4 separate times, significantly each time. They were willing to make less money in the short run. One of the things I like about Amazon is they think long term. Secondly, they raised pay for everyone that worked for Whole Foods. They put a minimum wage in just a month or 2 after the acquisition occurred of $15. And of course, that raised everybody's pay. Anybody that was below 15 went to 15. So then if you were at 15, you went up from there. And so it cost hundreds of millions of dollars a year to do that. So it was good for our team members. And also gave team members opportunities with Amazon. So many Whole Foods people now work for Amazon. It was good for our suppliers. We didn't have to drop any of our suppliers, and quite just the opposite. Once Amazon saw our sales volume, they picked up a lot of our suppliers because they could see how much business we were doing with a particular supplier, and then they wanted that in the Amazon Fresh stores. So it's good for our suppliers. Good for our investors. We had a 30% price premium that they got when the sale went through. And I'd say ultimately good for our communities as well. That Amazon did not interfere with our philanthropic work. I go into detail in the book towards the end to your second question, which is what do I think about it now? And the real question is, if I could do it all over again, would I make the same choice? And do I have any regrets? Those are the questions I get asked. And yeah, what I regret, I would rather have stayed independent, but I regret the circumstances that we found ourselves in that made Amazon the best option. They were the best option. Given the same circumstances, if I had to go back into the past, I'd make the exact same decision. It truly was a win-win for our stakeholders. Hey, I liked running an independent company. I wish we could have stayed independent. I go into some details in the book about how Whole Foods maybe created a situation that led to that. All in all, it was the right decision for the company, and I don't really regret it.
Amazon has been true to the vision and the values of Whole Foods. I mean, I was in one just recently, and they even allowed Amazon Prime. There's some sort of discount you get. And the stores have kind of held their culture, in other words. I mean, they're still Whole Foods.
Well, they are. I mean, a metaphor I might use is that Whole Foods has a very powerful culture, and Whole Foods people are very proud of the culture. And we're a pretty big company. Whole Foods was a Fortune 250 company when Amazon bought us, but Amazon was a Fortune 5 company when they bought us. We were like a Jupiter, a pretty big planet, but the gravitational pull of Amazon was more powerful than Jupiter's gravitational pull. So some of Amazon's culture, inevitably, they didn't try to consciously change Whole Foods. They didn't come in and say, we're going to change everything about your company. They were actually very respectful and tried to let Whole Foods be Whole Foods. But over time, a lot of things Amazon does sort of bled into Whole Foods, I think. I mean, it's still Whole Foods, but it's different. It's been influenced by Amazon. Whole Foods was already centralizing things, and that accelerated under Amazon's ownership. I'd say the company's more efficient. And the thing that's weird is that, COVID messed everything up. It'd be very interesting to see how Whole Foods would be today if COVID had never happened. It'd be different. There's no question about it. COVID was a life-changing event. For one thing, so many people stopped going to the office. A lot of them haven't come back to the offices, which means like our lunch business, our prepared foods business has never recovered from what it was pre-COVID. And Amazon really accelerated centralization. That's another thing they did for us. Amazon scaled us up for delivery. We couldn't have done that. They had the resources and the team to scale us quickly. So we were able to do home delivery all around the United States soon after COVID hit. And that ended up being a huge benefit. But that also led to a takeover of a lot of space in our stores. It led to more centralization. Amazon employees were the ones doing the delivery and doing the order filling. That led to confusion, if nothing else, with a lot of our customers.
Yeah, and that story is still being written. You mentioned, the multi-stakeholder win with regards to the acquisition. And of course, multi-stakeholder focus and benefit is at the root of your conscious capitalism movement and the book you wrote about that. So can you give us, just kind of the origin story of how that came about? Sounds like it came about through your work trying to find multi-stakeholder, wins at Whole Foods.
The actual answer to that is a little more complex. Really, I got my first take of stakeholders. I didn't have the language, but in our very first year at the big Whole Foods Market store, we experienced a 100-year flood. It was the worst flood Austin experienced in over 100 years, and it wiped our store out. We should have died. It was a near-death experience.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the only way we recovered was, we didn't call them stakeholders, but that's what they were. Our neighbors, our customers came and helped clean up the store. They didn't want us to die. The team members worked for free for 30 days while we tried to get back on our feet. Investors put in more money. Suppliers fronted us over $400,000 of new inventory, although we still owed them for the inventory that had been washed away in the flood. A bank loaned us $100,000. Now, this one's unbelievable. The bank actually turned the loan down, but the personal banker personally guaranteed the $100,000 loan because he just believed in me and he believed in Whole Foods and he knew we'd pay him back. And so they didn't let us die. And it was only later when I learned about stakeholder language that I realized, my God, that's what happened with Whole Foods. And in some sense, we were always trying to pay back our stakeholders for what they did to us. And this is the key thing. Most people think about stakeholders in terms of trade-offs. They see that they're like, if you're paying somebody more, then that means you're going to have higher prices. Or if you pay better to your employees, you're going to make less money. There's this constant thinking that the stakeholders are sort of competing with each other, struggling with each other. And that is true to a certain extent, but that is like 10% of the story. The bigger part of the story is that these stakeholders are basically interdependent on each other, and that you're basically an ecosystem. You're managing the integrity of an entire stakeholder ecosystem. And so once you realize the interdependence, then you start to ask different questions. How can we develop strategies where all of our stakeholders are benefiting simultaneously? So how can we create more value for all of them? More value for our customers, more value for our employees, more value for our suppliers, more value for our investors, more value for the communities that we're in. As long as you're in the trade-off frame of mind, you won't see it. But once you make this shift mentally to see how they're interdependent and that they're connected. For example, if you screw your employees, that may result in higher profits in the short run. In the long run, you're probably going to get labor unions. You're going to get strikes, and pay may go up a lot higher because your employees are angry at you and they seek revenge. If you screw your suppliers and you try to cheat them, well, you can get away with that for a little while, but what happens is they begin to cut you out of their best deals. You're no longer a preferential customer. If you're a customer at all, they may decide they don't want to trade with you any longer. It's true of each of the stakeholder groups. There's a balance between all the stakeholders, and a good leader senses that balance, sees the interdependency, sees that there's this interconnected system, and tries to manage that system in the most intelligent way possible so that all are flourishing. Win, win, win.
How does this connect to the idea of sustainability and like moving more toward a circular economy instead of, the extraction to garbage dump economy that we have right now? Imagine there's a strong connection especially from your industry?
Well, I think there's an environmental stakeholder that I didn't include. You're trading voluntarily with all the other stakeholders, but the environment is kind of like it surrounds the whole thing.
It's a meta stakeholder.
Yeah, it's a meta stakeholder, and nobody speaks for the environment, right? It can't go argue its own case. But that was always an important value for Whole Foods: sustainability, animal welfare, being good environmental citizens is important to us. That being said, that is one of the stakeholders, but it's not the only stakeholder. If you start to trade off all the other stakeholders just to try to fulfill the environmental stakeholder, you'll end up wrecking your business. There's always limits for what you can do in the present reality as you find it. But obviously, in the long term, we're going to want to have a more sustainable economy. But we can't put the whole world in poverty now that people are beginning to escape it because we don't want to use fossil fuels, for example. Fossil fuels are the basis. That's the fundamental energy source that's allowed humanity to begin to create prosperity, not for a few people, but for literally billions of people. So we can't just throw that away or we'd plunge back into the pre-industrial economy. And so we have to do this in a thoughtful, intelligent way.
What do you think? And maybe you just answered the question about the whole pushback against ESG, environmental, social, and governance. There's investor pushback, and I think there's kind of a backlash against that whole idea.
I would say ESG is important. It's something that shouldn't be ignored, but it's not the most important thing. And this is the thing that people don't understand when you talk about stakeholders. And I talked about the interdependencies, but all those stakeholders they all matter, but they're not all equal, not in business. By far, the most important stakeholder is the customer. No customer is no business. And if you don't have satisfied customers, your business is going to fail. So I would say probably the customer is the most important stakeholder. And since a lot of businesses don't even have employees, but they all have owners, I'd have to say the owners are probably the second most important stakeholder. Employees third, then probably suppliers, then the communities that we're part of, and then the environment. They all matter. So if you start sacrificing your customers, your employees, your investors, and everything else for ESG ideology, well, you're probably destroying the business. And then you're not even going to be able to fulfill the ESG goals. So let's just say, we have to do this in a very thoughtful way. How do we move in ways that are considerate of ESG issues? And one of the ways I think about it is they can't be forced on the business externally. It's better if they're internal, if they become part of your own internal thinking system. For example, Whole Foods is in the food business. From an ESG standpoint, it's far more important that we work in the area where we're good at, like seafood sustainability or animal welfare or regenerative agriculture. Those are areas that are directly connected to what our business model is, rather than more abstract environmental issues that may not have anything directly to do with our company, but that somebody else outside the company thinks is important. ESG is a prickly thing. I almost hate to go any further into this because I know I'm just going to upset people.
I had a conversation about ESG with the CEO of EY, and I got to a little political gobbledygook pretty quick.
They're going to get paid either way. They're an accounting firm.
That's true. Good point. You've mentioned a few things that piqued my interest. Obviously, you're a Texan. I share your views on fossil fuels, and I'm very sensitive to the backlash from the global South, talking about green colonialism and imposing Western views, which are largely kind of these neoliberal kind of, I guess, what's the word, green meme. You got to go green, and the climate is going to destroy everybody.
It's the progressive postmodern worldview.
The progressive postmodernism, right? Thank you. And the global South is saying, well, wait a minute. You're saying that we can't enjoy the development and the wealth that accrued to the North through fossil fuels, and we've got to what? It's a real problem. And so I guess I'm curious, what issues keep you up at night? Because there's so much going on in the world and so many interesting things happening.
I've reached a different phase of my life, Mark. I'm 70 years old now. I've decided that talking about politics just gets people upset.
Oh, for sure. Set politics aside,
I've also decided that on any of the problems that I can't do anything about, I don't spend much time thinking about them or worrying about them. I just want to do as much good as I can do in the world. And I have areas where I can do good and make a contribution. So I'm focused on that. People spend a lot of time being upset and anxious and afraid. I mean, here's the thing I want to get across, and I try to get across every time I get an opportunity to do this. This is the best time it's ever been to be alive. in the entire history of the human race. People are concerned about these problems as if there were no problems in the past. The problems in the past were far worse problems than we have today. People worry about issues like racism and climate change. They worry about inequality, things like that. And here's the thing. I mean, when has the world not been racist?
Right.
It's probably
Never.
probably less racist today than it's ever been, particularly in countries like the United States, which, if you know the history of America, it's a history of massive racism. And there's just a lot less today than there used to be. Is it perfect? No. Are we making progress? Yes. Almost every way. The book I always try to get people to read, it's like the number one book if I could get any people to read one book, besides my own book, of course, the whole story. I would really love for people to read Steve Pinker's book, Enlightenment Now, where he documents just overwhelmingly how much progress humanity has made in every area, every single area that you can think about. But we just hear all this scare stuff all the time about how horrible things are. This has been the best time. And so many young people don't want to have children because they don't want to raise them in a society that's got so many problems. It's like, you got to be kidding me. This is the best it's ever been. And guess what? Do we still have problems? Sure. When have we not had problems? And that's the job of every generation, to solve some of the problems that their parents couldn't solve. And guess what? They'll create new problems that their children will have to solve. That's the human condition, and it's not going to change. We're not going to create a utopia. Human beings are what we are, but we can evolve, we can grow, and we are, and we're making progress. We're just not going to make it perfect.
Yeah, Peter Diamandis with his work with abundance really helped open my eyes to kind of just that same story you're talking about with Enlightenment Now. We are in an extremely abundant world, and I think you have to train yourself to have an abundant mindset and to be optimistic about the future, because there's so much negativity and kind of cultural conditioning to catastrophize and to think that, the world is falling apart.
I am a huge optimist.
Where is conscious capitalism going? What's next for that? What's the future hold?
People misunderstand conscious capitalism because let me tell you what it's not. Conscious capitalism is not an economic system.
Right.
Conscious capitalism is not a political ideology. Conscious capitalism is a management philosophy. It's just a way you should manage your business.
Is there a sort of movement behind it as well, though? I mean, like a community of practitioners?
Yes, we have a community of practitioners, but it's a catchy brand name. And so it's being attacked politically on both sides.
Really?
Yeah, well, the traditional capitalists don't think you need to put the modifier conscious behind capitalism. Capitalism is just fine the way it is. But if the people, we'll call them the anti-capitalists, who don't like capitalism, they're trying to weaponize conscious capitalism to take power away from the shareholders. They're using stakeholder philosophy, which again is a management philosophy, how you should manage it. They're trying to take power from the owners and redistribute that. So you'd have a board that had a customer representative, you'd have a labor union representative, you'd have a supplier representative, and you have an owner representative, and they'd sort out how the money gets divided up. And that just basically would take power and control away from the investor class and the ownership class. And I'm very much opposed to that. And that's not what we meant by conscious capitalism.
Right.
What it is, it's a management philosophy that believes every business has a potential for higher purpose, that it has to make money, of course. But if you ask, what's the higher purpose of a doctor? It's to heal people, right? What's the higher purpose of a teacher? To educate. Architects design things. Engineers construct things. Every one of the professions has a higher purpose. They all have to make money. Well, business is the same way. It has to make money or it'll die. But that doesn't mean it exists to make money. It exists to create value for customers. And its higher purpose can be derived from that understanding of how they create value for customers. And that's the way business should market itself, about the value it's creating, not about the money it's making. That's a byproduct of creating value for other people. Secondly, there are all these stakeholders, and they all do matter, and we should be conscious of them. The best way to maximize long-term shareholder value is to not make it the primary goal. You'll make the trade-offs I was talking about previously, and the business is likely to sub-optimize. Thirdly, that we should lead in such a way that we'll be conscious leaders, that we're servant leaders, that we're serving the higher purpose of the business. We're serving all the stakeholders, and that's how our leaders should be. We're not just trying to line our own pockets and make as much money as possible. And fourth, businesses should create cultures that allow human beings to flourish. I do think that's is one of the formulas for good success in business and life. We started our conversation off by talking about purpose and love, creating good places to work where people want to work and don't want to leave. And that's what conscious capitalism is. It's a management philosophy of how to operate a business in a more conscious way.
we got to wrap up here pretty soon, but I wanted to go back to, conscious capitalism, presupposes that there's consciousness involved, right? And so clearly, there's a lot of talk about maybe consciousness being elevated or raised on this planet, and this is beyond the scope of my knowledge to know that for sure. But, how does this relate to your ego death experience? Entrepreneurs and executives, participating in psychedelic experiences, an active attempt, which seems relatively new. I mean, you were on the bleeding edge of that, but now it's becoming more mainstream to kind of elevate or experience more consciousness or, whatever languaging we could put around that. What is your view on that?
It's absolutely happening. I mean, we are evolving. Our species is evolving. We're culturally evolving. Each generation has to start over again, but because the culture's been continually uplifted, it's easier for the next generation. I know it's possible because my whole book is a testament to my own evolution as a human being and my own spiritual growth. So it's happened for me, and there's every reason to believe it can happen for anybody and everybody. So that's one of the reasons I'm very optimistic, is that I think the consciousness of people is continuing to grow. And there's every reason to think if the anti-capitalists don't take over, there's every reason to think that we'll continue to create prosperity. And on that prosperity base, we'll continue to have consciousness, and the cultures evolve to higher and healthier states. Surely, Mark, you see that in your own life, right? You're not the same man you were 20 years ago.
No, and I mean, let's talk about your spiritual practice. Like, how do you maintain that momentum with your evolutionary impulse?
First of all, every moment is an opportunity for learning and growth. So that's the most important thing, is listening, paying attention to what's happening, getting out of your own defensive way, being open-hearted, open to the moment, that's what's happening in the moment, and trying to extend love, goodwill, and good intent to other people. So you can do that every second you're conscious and awake. But if you're asking about, like, what are my practices that I do besides that one, hopefully every day, I start out my day, I arrange my life, I get up very early. I'm going to wake up at 5:30, thereabouts. I'm going to start out with a spiritual reading. And it takes me maybe 10 or 15 minutes of spiritual reading to kind of get my mind settled in on that. Then I'm going to do gratitudes for 5 minutes or so. And I find gratitudes inherently expansive. You can't do it as a ritual. You have to actually get into it and genuinely.
You have to open your heart.
Open your heart and feel it. And so it's very expansive if you don't do it ritualistically. Then I might do a little affirmation and prayer after that. And then I do meditation. It's trained in TM, so I've been doing TM. But I did have an interesting experience, which I talked about in the book. When I was doing a guided spiritual journey, I got a new mantra.
Oh, cool.
And the new mantra, which is what I do every day now, is I breathe in on I am, and then I exhale love. I am love. I am love. And I'm just thinking that all over and over and over again. If you try it, it's a very powerful mantra to use. And then after that, I'm going to do some kind of physical exercise. I'm either going to do yoga, go for a long walk, or play pickleball.
Nice.
Oh, and say sometimes Pilates too. And then after that, I start my work day.
That's a great ritual. I know mine is not too dissimilar, but I love that. That's awesome. So your book, is it out in the marketplace?
Yes.
The whole story?
Pub day was May 21st. So
May 21st.
You can get it. Whole Foods is selling it in all the stores. Almost every
Oh, cool.
bookstores have it. Amazon has it. There's also an Audible book that's available if you like to listen to
You have a leg up for book sales there.
I won't tell you the deal. I cut a win-win deal with Whole Foods on the book.
Did you?
Yes.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to share about the book that people might learn from it or experience by reading it?
The book reads like a novel. We did not even put an index in the book. It's nonfiction, but it goes from one story to the next story to the next. I tell the story of Whole Foods through stories.
Nice.
And with scene setting, dialogue, and conversations. I think the book reads, it's 400 pages, but it reads really quickly. Most people get into it and they really don't want to put it down. So there's also a spiritual personal growth thread through the whole book. First chapter is called The Game of Life, and the final chapter is called The Infinite Game. And I do believe that life itself is an infinite game. Existence is an infinite game. And so anybody that's read that book has told me they love the book. It's one of the best books they've ever read, one of the best business books I've ever read. I don't want to toot my horn any more than that.
It's okay.
The one thing we haven't talked about, if we're trying to wrap up here, is I have retired from Whole Foods, but I've co-founded a new business called Love Life.
Love.life.
Yes, but we pronounce it Love Life. It's love.life because that's our URL, www.love.life, not love.life.com, love.life. And think of it as we've got a telehealth business that we do in telehealth medicine in 50 states. We have an online coaching business that we're coaching people with diabetes and for weight loss. We have a restaurant in Miami called Love Life Cafe, which is where we got our name from. And then we're opening up our first flagship location in the LA area in El Segundo, just a month out now, July 9th. We'll be opening up. It's an old Best Buy. It's 45,000 square feet. It's going to have a healthy restaurant. It's going to have a state-of-the-art fitness center. It's going to have the super cool spa, tons of recovery modalities, 3 pickleball courts, and a medical center. Frame it up this way. When do most people go see a doctor?
Yeah, when they're broken.
Yes, when they're broken. Our strategy is to work with doctors and wellness coaches, get your baseline established through testing, develop precision, individualized plans for each member, and then their job is to help you become the healthiest version of yourself.
That's awesome.
And not just physically, but also emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. We'll be doing meditation classes, yoga, Pilates, and we'll be doing breath work as well.
Terrific.
So,
this be a membership-based thing, or how?
The restaurant will be open to the public, but everything else will be strictly membership.
That's terrific. Absolutely necessary as the medical system and the insurance industry starts to collapse, which it's doing right now.
It's true. You've ever asked people a question, would they like to be 100? Most people say, if you ask them, they'll say most people think, no, I don't want to be 100. Because anybody...
That sounds uncomfortable.
Yes. But if you change that and you say, would you like to be 100 if you still had the same sharpness of mind and you still felt really healthy and vital, would you want to be 100 then? Everybody says, yeah, of course, but how can you do that? Well, that's what Love Life's aiming to do.
That's terrific. I can't wait to see that. That's awesome.
Hey everyone, this is Mark Devine, founder of SealFit and Unbeatable Mind, and I'm super stoked to announce that my new book, Uncommon, is due out from St. Martin's Press this summer, July 16th. And we've launched a pre-order campaign. You can learn more about that at readuncommon.com to try to get early awareness for the book, which I hope will help a lot of people, where I go and do a deep dive on the 5 mountains of personal mastery: physical, mental, emotional, intuitional, and spiritual. Uncommon, simple principles for an extraordinary life. Check it out at readuncommon.com, and thank you for your support and being part of the change that you want to see in this world. Hoo-yah, Divine out.
John, thanks so much for your time today. It's been an honor having this conversation. Very, very enjoyable. Whole story, your book, The Whole Story, Adventures in Love, Life, and Capitalism.
That's it.
I'm going to check it out. Did you read the audio version?
I read the prologue in the audio version.
Okay.
And I liked it so much, I wish I'd read the whole book.
Yeah.
But the professional reader, Adam Barr, does a terrific job. I can't do the accent. He has different voices for different characters.
It makes sense to have a pro. Yeah,
I can't do that.
I'm also, by the way, into sci-fi, and I have my preferred voice actor, this guy named R.C. Bray, who just does incredible work. I don't know if you ever come across him.
I haven't. What are a couple of sci-fi books you really like?
Like Expeditionary Force, Ruins of the Galaxy. These are just fascinating books.
You like the space operas?
I like the space operas. Yeah, absolutely love them.
Did you ever read any Orson Scott Card?
I don't think so, no. Orson Scott Card?
Yeah, check out Ender's Game, which is a...
Oh, Ender's Game, yeah. Well, there's the movie around that. Was that
the movie?
The same?
Yes, but the movie is 10% as good as the book.
Is that right? I'll check it out. I've been looking for the next thing.
Well, because of that Seal's background, the whole Ender series is about, they're fighting an alien species called the Buggers, right. And it's pretty interesting.
Oh, I'm going to have to check that out. That's the only thing that I really listen to with audiobooks, and it just comes alive for me. It's just awesome.
Me as well. Did you watch the recent show that called The 3-Body Problem?
I actually listened to the audiobook.
I'm listening to the first audiobook right now because I like the show so much.
Funny that you said that, because I started to watch the show, and I think it's very well done, but I actually like the audiobook better.
Well, almost always the book's going to be better than the show because they can go deeper into the characters.
That's right. Yeah. Awesome. John, again, thanks so much. I really appreciate you. Is there any way, so people, besides the book and Love.life, do you have any other way that if someone wanted to reach out to you for something important, for people to contact you, or social media, anything like that?
I have all the social media handles. I am John Mackey. You could also go to my website, which is johnpmackey.com. That's the easiest one, johnpmackey.com. And then you can access all my social media from that.
Thank you again, sir. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Mark. I hope we get together in person sometime again.